Hello everybody, we are back with more Nintendo Week. I'm your host, Colin McIsaac, and as always, I'm joined by Alex Plant.
Yay!
And Ben Lemereau.
Still here.
So, Nintendo has been talking a lot about making plans to use smartphones to promote their main line of business. So, that is our topic of discussion for today. Do we think they'll make games or companion apps or what? What will these types of things look like?
Well, I'm not really sure what Nintendo's plans are going to be, just because this is something Iwata's been saying for what seems like forever now. It's probably, in reality, been maybe a year and a half. He keeps telling investors, we have plans to use cell phones to our advantage, we're going to use the mobile market to increase sales, etc., etc., but he never gives any specifics. The one thing he does say, which I think is unfortunate, is that they will not be releasing any games. He's stuck really firm on that, is that they do not plan to release any games on cell phones, and so I can't say for sure what they will do. But I wrote an editorial about this subject a while back. You can read it at Gamnesia.com. And basically, I outlined my idea for what I think would be an effective strategy for them. You know, if I was CEO of Nintendo, if I was in Iwata's shoes...
You will be one day, Ben.
Obviously, you know, I've got my grand master plan. I've got, you know, like a list of objectives before I finally take Nintendo down. Or, I mean, you know, take over Nintendo. So, essentially, the 2 points Iwata always brings up when investors ask him why he won't release cell phone games is, A, you can't make them control as good on a phone or a tablet as you could on a console, and he doesn't want to lower the quality of the games by having lackluster controls. And B, he says if we put games like Mario on a cell phone, then people won't want to buy a 3DS. And I essentially outlined how Nintendo can use smartphones to their advantage while taking those 2 points and sort of flipping them on their backs. On the first point, he says, you know, they don't want to hurt the controls of games. And there's definitely a lot of games where you do need super tight, super responsive controls, especially with, you know, platformers.
But
and
on the
things
flip
of that
side,
nature.
there are also a lot of games where you don't need super tight controls.
Exactly.
You know, like you can play lots of RPGs. There are a lot of games like if you look at like WarioWare Touched or WarioWare Smooth Moves, you don't need super tight controls. You just need to touch something on the screen, and it works great.
Exactly.
And they just made a game. It's called Pokemon Shuffle, where it's literally a smartphone game. I mean, not literally, but basically a smartphone game on a 3DS.
Right, so there's plenty of old games where super tight controls aren't needed, like RPGs, and there's plenty, especially with the DS lineup, of games that are designed specifically for touch controls instead of super tight controls. So I think in the short term, it would really do Nintendo good to have sort of like a virtual console type app where they release some old games, or they release some DS and 3DS games that are designed for specifically for touch controls, or they could release some new games. And I'm not talking like full, like, you know, the like $40 type adventure games you'd find on 3DS, but just, you know, smartphone type apps, but with the Nintendo spin for $1 or for free, but with, you know, maybe some in-game transactions. Nothing that, you know, was required to beat the game, but
Nothing like Final Fantasy Heroes or whatever that was.
no, just
God.
you know, maybe like some alternate costumes
Right,
or alternate music or things like that. And then on the second point, he always says if we release games on smartphones, it's going to hurt 3DS sales, and this puzzles me because there's no if about it. This isn't some future scenario. The mobile market is already cutting into Nintendo sales in a major way. Like, you look at where 3DS is in its life right now and how many units it's sold. It's only sold about half as many units in its first 4 years as DS did. And there's a lot of factors involved in that. It's not all smartphones, but a major factor in it is that kids aren't really asking their parents for a handheld system anymore because they've got a phone, they've got a tablet. They didn't grow up necessarily with Mario and Donkey Kong. They've grown up with these cell phone games. So it's not really an issue of if we release games on cell phones at some point, then 3DS sales are going to drop. It is already happening. It's happening in a major way, and right now Nintendo's just sort of ignoring it and saying we have plans to deal with it eventually.
Right.
And what I'd like to see them do instead is to release game demos or little spin-off games that go in line with upcoming games. Like, for example, if there's an Animal Crossing game coming out later in this year, you could release a little, you know, cheap $1 Animal Crossing app or a free-to-play Animal Crossing app. And so these kids that have, you know, grown up playing cell phone games and tablet games, they get a little taste of that Animal Crossing experience, but not the full experience you would get on 3DS or Wii U. And then, you know, once you've beat the game, or once you've played the app extensively, maybe you get like a little teaser that says if you want the full experience, you can play it on the new Animal Crossing game on 3DS or the new Animal Crossing game on Wii U.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of Nintendo games that could easily be turned into demos or little spin-off games and used to draw in a new audience of young gamers.
Absolutely, and I definitely think that kind of model where they do like demos or little side games is a great model for them, because they can introduce their IP to all these people who really only play on smartphone devices. And that way they can use that as a springboard to say, hey, if you like playing these games, you would like owning a dedicated gaming console. And we provide you with a dedicated gaming console that has much fuller, much better versions of all these games. They can release something like a little Mario Kart game with like Mario, Luigi, Peach, and Toad playable, with like 3 courses that you can only do quick run for, like no Grand Prix, that you can play, and you can play Mario Kart, and you can enjoy all of the fun of Mario Kart, but it's so small that it gives you just a taste of like what Mario Kart is, and then says when you've gone through the whole game, so say like there's a mode you do all 3 courses in a row, when you complete that, instead of like a credit sequence like they would do in a full Mario Kart game, it would just say, hey, if you liked this, you'd enjoy Mario Kart 8. You should think about buying a Wii U.
Exactly.
And I think the trick with that kind of plan is to do it in a way that's not, really shoving themselves in the consumer's face. Doing so in a way that invites them to Nintendo's platforms, rather than in a way that says, go buy a Wii U right now, you have to. And then, I could easily see them slipping down a path where, say, like, the demo is limited to, like, 3 uses, and then you can't play it anymore. You have to buy, like, the full game. And I don't think that's the right approach. I think the right approach is to make something that works in its entirety as a smartphone game, and then just invites them to play the full kinds of games.
Right, it has to feel like a natural progression. And I think an interesting quote brought up was by PlayStation head Shuhei Yoshida. He said that, according to their research, a lot of people start off with their kids playing Nintendo games when they're really young, and as they get older, they just sort of graduate towards PlayStation games. So he said, we love having Nintendo around. We don't consider them competition. We consider them a way to keep young people hooked on games. But right now, a lot of young people aren't going out, or a lot of parents aren't going out and buying a 3DS or a Wii U for their young kids. They're buying them a phone or a tablet.
So what you're saying is video games are doomed.
No, absolutely not. But just as Sony sort of sees Nintendo games as a stepping stone to, get young gamers to become gamers for life, I think Nintendo can use these, little phone games to get people to be gamers for life, and to get them to sort of graduate from phones and tablets when they're little kids into Nintendo games when they're a little bit older and ready for a bigger experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they have, such an amazing lineup of IP. There's a reason that people get so involved with Nintendo when they're younger, and I think it's that amazing lineup of this sort of sentimental characters, like Donkey Kong, Zelda, Mario. These characters are in an almost inexplainable way, they, I think, really speak to like younger audiences, and stick with younger audiences as they grow up. And so I think that their IP is really such a good way to get people on smartphone platforms interested in full gaming. And they could do like a sort of Mario Kart demo, like I explained. They could do like a one dungeon demo of like a Zelda game running on the Link Between Worlds engine. That then says, hey, maybe you would like a Link Between Worlds. They could do, a couple of Mario courses, and I think something that is really, best suited for smartphones is something like WarioWare or Rhythm Heaven, where really all you need is a touch screen. You don't need something super precise like you would in like a platformer. All you need is like gyro controls and a touch screen. And those are the kinds of games that I think would work absolutely the best. So Mario Kart, WarioWare, Rhythm Heaven, even F-Zero maybe could work on like a smartphone thing if it was just a little...
How pissed would diehard F-Zero fans be if the series was revived as a cell phone game instead of a Wii U game?
Or a free-to-play game.
Oh my... It would be a companion game, okay, guys?
Yeah, on the note of companion games, I think one interesting thing that they could do is make companion games that aren't really just glorified marketing tools. Because I know they've talked a lot about smartphones being a tool for reaching consumers, but it'd also be interesting if they were value adds to the actual games themselves. So, for example, we were talking about Animal Crossing. What if they made an Animal Crossing mobile game that let you earn stuff that you can then carry over into your main Animal Crossing game. Or in a Zelda game, maybe you earn rupees that you can then use to buy better equipment or something like that. That way, they wouldn't just be these one-off.
I think that would be really nice, but I think they would need to. It would be very tricky because they would need to do it in a way that not playing the mobile game doesn't take away from the experience of the main game.
I think if you have, optional ways to earn extra things on the mobile version of it, that would be good. But I think if you start dabbling in exclusive content that you can only get on the mobile version, I think that's when Nintendo fans are going to start to get a little bit upset.
Especially if they do it with Pokemon.
Yeah.
Version exclusives are enough.
Yeah, I mean, I could see a handful of little extras you get from the app that are just from the app, like little inconsequential things being okay. But yeah, I was really getting at something more like what Ben was saying, where maybe it's an alternative to grinding for money if you just use their app. Not the only way you can get money is through the mobile app. That would just be absurd.
And so something like this whole smartphone sort of side games thing, I think is also something really to consider is given games that they've been making recently, like Game & Wario, and not so much Nintendo Land, maybe a couple of the attractions in Nintendo Land. But something like Pokemon Shuffle, Game & Wario, a lot of those games in Game & Wario would be so much better suited as a mobile game than as a Wii U game, because a lot of these experiences, they've been making collections like this. We've seen NES Remix, for example. They have these collections where they're not actually fun as a sit down and play at home on the couch experience. But they would be a lot of fun as an open it for 5 minutes on the train experience.
People still use trains?
Okay, Ben.
Well,
ha ha. Good joke.
They do in Japan, and
I use trains.
Nintendo's from Japan. You'd think they'd put 2 and 2 together.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They should, release train games in Japan, just because trains and cell phones are both ridiculously popular.
Brain training.
Spirit Treks too.
Oh, all the puns.
Yeah, no. So things like this. I mean, there are certain of these little mini niblet things that like for example, I reviewed Game & Wario. I gave it a 5 because it's just not what you want from a real tried and true video game. If it were on smartphones, however, I could see it not only being a fun and sort of addicting experience, but something, games that you would share with your friends and say oh, hey, I just beat your high score in Ninja Jump or whatever it's called. I bet
it more of a social thing.
Yeah, exactly. Because when you play smartphone games, you sort of challenge your friends almost. Hey, this is how far I got in Jetpack Joyride. Did you see the bubble power up? That's pretty cool. Whereas when you're sitting really at home on your consoles, it's not nearly as social an experience.
Well, you tend to be limited to your social circle within the console community, not within your broader social community.
Right, exactly. Whereas smartphone games, you can really take them and talk to anyone and say, this is something cool that you should try out.
So I think all of our answers have sort of centered around what games they could release on them, but Nintendo seems completely against releasing games. So are there any ideas really for what they could do here?
Miiverse, Mario Kart TV, I don't see why those would convince people to buy hardware though.
Right.
That's the issue I see is that they're absolutely correct that putting smartphone games out in addition to console games would dilute the brand, but they're not correct that quality is inherent of smartphone games. What they need to do is just make sure that it's one game per series, that they don't release a companion Mario Kart mobile game for every single Mario Kart game they make. They just make one Mario Kart game. This is the Mario Kart for smartphones. This is the Mario Kart that will tell you to go and buy real Mario Kart.
Or even just not looking at it from that lens. They need to, if they're going to be thinking about the value of smartphone games, they should be thinking about making valuable smartphone games, not games that are going to make their brand look bad. Because there are smartphone games that are good value and people really enjoy. And if Nintendo's really serious about making high quality games, then why couldn't they make a high quality smartphone game?
Exactly, especially with their expertise in touch games just from the DS.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and it doesn't even have to be related to one of their IP. It could be something completely new.
Yeah, although I do think Rhythm Heaven would work so well.
Yeah, and I honestly, it has more of a future on a platform like that than it would on a,
on a 3DS
absolutely. Or a Wii U.
It would certainly gather more fans on smartphones than it has now. Rhythm Heaven is such a niche title, but even something like Brain Age, games like those are, now the audience for Brain Age is not going to come to 3DS. Brain Age needs to come to them because
Yeah.
there's already an expectation that things like that are going to be on smartphones. Back when the DS was launched, there was no expectation for things like that because the DS was what introduced things like that. You bought a DS to participate in those types of games. People now have smartphones to participate in those types of games, and things like Brain Age, brain training, those are outliers. And now that people can get so many things on their smartphones, they're not going to migrate to a 3DS just for Brain Age. But Brain Age would see the same level of monumental success that it saw in its DS days if that software came to the hardware where its fans were, or where its audience was, rather. I don't think that there's anyone who's really considers themselves a fan of Brain Age.
Well, certainly no one in the gaming circles. Maybe there's some diehard people who got a lot of value out of it when it came out.
Might.
Some little Asian
Might.
kid.
One thing that we kind of haven't talked about yet is doing things with smartphones that don't directly involve games at all. Well, I guess Colin mentioned Miiverse, but a lot of the flack Nintendo's been getting for their current platforms has to do with how poor the services are. And I think if they divorced the services from their gaming platforms and started to build, say, a native mobile app that is a front end to their services like Miiverse or the eShop, it would give them a chance to, first of all, break out of their paradigm of how things work on their platforms and start looking at how things work in the real world where consumers live.
That was cold.
Well, it's true. I mean, who says the Nintendo eShop is like the best digital store I've ever used? No one says it. But thinking about how that would work on a smartphone would give them a chance to look at it kind of in a non-Nintendo centric way. And plus, since they're trying to get a head start on their future platform, which they say is going to be built on Nintendo Network IDs, this would give them a good chance to kind of get a head start and not have to worry about building it for their next hardware, but worry about setting the groundwork now on devices that people already own. Look at, for example, the friend list. Right now, if you want to check and see if your friends are playing games online, you have to turn on your Wii U. Well, wouldn't it be nice if you didn't have to turn on your Wii U and you could just pop open your app on your cell phone and see, oh, hey, my friend's playing Mario Kart.
I mean, the thing is, I can't really see any sort of app that isn't a game that would actually attract people to their hardware, because that really seems to be their goal in creating smartphone apps, is getting new customers. But I feel like what Nintendo does right is their games, and that they cannot convince people of that unless they bring the games to the consumers and say, here's what we do so well, you can get it even better on this other hardware. And that's kind of, that see it for yourself approach is what launched the DS and the Wii into such amazing success. And it feels to me like they're kind of going back on that now. They're not letting people see the games. They're saying, make an investment in our hardware first, and then you can enjoy the games. But no one's going to do that if they don't know that they're going to like the games.
And I guess the point I was trying to make by talking about services was right now they're getting a lot of bad press for their bad services. And if they could reverse that and turn it into good press, Nintendo's getting with the times, Nintendo's got great mobile apps, that would be one less thing that would make their platforms unattractive.
Well, yeah.
Since, nowadays it seems like the default is you have to have great services to have a great platform. So I think if they're going to be attracting people to their platform, they need to lay that groundwork, even apart from drawing people to their games. So I agree with you, but I think there's more to it than just the marketing aspect.
Yeah, so we're not exactly sure what to expect from Nintendo yet, but hopefully it won't be too much longer of a wait, because Iwata's sort of been dodging this question for months now. But he said at the last investors meeting that he hopes to address how they plan to use cell phones at the next meeting. So hopefully we can expect more information on this in about 2.5 months.
Yeah.
And hopefully that comes with some actual concrete timelines and not just vagaries.
Our plan is to tell you our plan at the next investors meeting.
We're going to announce our announcement. Please understand.
So, everybody, thank you so much for listening. This is the Endo Nintendo Week for today. If you like this podcast, please subscribe either on iTunes or on YouTube. We launch new episodes on iTunes every Wednesday, and they release on YouTube between Thursday and Friday. And if you like this show, please head over to iTunes and leave us a review. It really helps with visibility, so we greatly appreciate it, especially if you have good things to say and not bad ones. If you can't wait till next week for more of our stuff, you can head to Gamnesia.com to see more gaming news as it happens. Sony, Microsoft, Indie, you name it, and even a lot of Nintendo news that we didn't have time to discuss on this week's show is all there, and it will all be there Thursday, Friday, Saturday, every day, always updating. And finally, if you have questions or feedback for Nintendo Week, please send it to colin@gamnesia.com. That's COLIN @gamnesia.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you have another great week.